All righty. Welcome to penpodcast.com with your co-host Nico Pinkin of Pen for Hire NYC. Today we are joined by Michael Atwood. Thank you so much, Michael, for being here today.
My pleasure, Nico. Very, very nice to be here.
And where are you calling us from today?
So I'm in North Attleborough, Massachusetts. We're about 45 minutes out of Boston and probably about 20 minutes out of Providence, Rhode Island. So we share some proximity with those two cities, which is pretty cool.
Oh, perfect. Yes, I understand. As somebody coming out of Worcester, I completely understand.
Yeah, Worcester.
Yeah. So we're here in Mass. Um, but we are here to discuss, a lot of the stuff that you have primarily. When I was looking at your author bio, I couldn't help but see just that you specialized in English when you were studying, as well as you focused on that. And you did your undergrad as well as your graduate for professional writing, and you
Yeah.
even became an English teacher for high school.
Yeah, so I've been teaching for 24 years. Started in I went to a Catholic high school in
Hmm.
Attleboro, and I taught at Bishop Fien for a couple of years, where my daughter actually goes now. And then I went into public education, and I've been there ever since. So, currently teaching AP Literature and AP Language and
Hmm.
Composition. And yeah, no, at Boston College, I studied literature. It was a big part of my undergrad experience. But I also worked for the Boston Globe as a journalist, a sports writer. So
Mm.
writing had always been there. Of course, as a student, you're doing that academic writing, and then I did sports writing and journalism too. So I've been writing for a while.
Yeah, because when I saw that you were writing for the Boston Globe, Patriot Ledger, North Attleboro Free Press, and the Attleboro Sun Chronicle, you have extensive experience regarding writing professionally as well as essentially commercially, and since you're a teacher, academically as well. And I just want to know, how do you contain all your interests and you say, hey, I'm a writer, but these are the things that I like to write about?
That's I think it started with me. My dad was a big sports fan, so I grew up in a Red Sox, Celtics, Patriots type family. As you know,
Yeah.
being from Worcester, I think you probably are exposed to me. So, at the breakfast table is the Boston Globe sports section every morning.
Hmm.
And I'd read the Globe as much as I could before school, and just aspired to be like those great writers for the Boston Globe. And I think sports was my first interest, just
Hmm.
learning how to write about it, to describe what happens in the games. Um, I listened to, I think as a kid, I'm 50 years old, so I listened to a lot of radio.
Hmm.
And I always found that both the spoken and written form describing what was going on in a sports competition. I mean, that was my early training in writing, and
Hmm.
just, kind of observing and soaking it up, and I even listened to that. I came in last night. We changed our cable package, so I didn't have a TNT to watch the Celtics. So
Hmm.
I popped on the radio and listened to Cedric Maxwell, one of my favorite players, as the color man. And, just the way that sports is described, I think it was very formative. That was my first. I played a lot of sports. I love to write about it and watch it. And, if I had ended up staying on at the Globe and, living in a triple decker and somewhere in Boston, and just being a sports writer, I probably would have been pretty happy. But it's we're sports crazy, in New England. So
No, that is perfectly understandable. Now, my thing is, how did you have such a focus on writing that despite being no longer a sports writer, you still have the passion for writing?
well, I think what it came down to is always love literature. My mom was an English teacher. I was reading like crazy in high school, and then I got to BC, and I really jumped into literature.
Hmm.
And I just had a passion to take that sports angle and really, just read all the classics and analyze what was going on with plot and character and symbolism and all the rest. So I really, I just and I loved writing analysis is a big thing I do with my students
Mm-hmm.
today, literary analysis. So I loved analyzing. I think I became an English teacher really based on, well, this symbolizes this, or this theme is going on in this
Mm-hmm.
novel. It really kind of popped out to me as it was a different take. It wasn't just reading a book anymore. It was breaking down the parts.
Mm-hmm.
And and like I said, in teaching AP literature, our question 3 is literary analysis, breaking down a novel or a play. And that's really where it started for me in college and in
Mm-hmm.
high school. I had some great English teachers at Bishop Fien as well. So yeah, the literary analysis, and then you sit down and write about it. You write about a
Mm-hmm.
novel or a play, or and I just kind of took that from the sports writing, moved into the academic writing, and just kept going. And then I wanted to create my own stories, so that's how I get into fiction as well.
So you use the essentially experience that you gained with the reading as well as the writing from the sports side in order to essentially transition over to
Right.
the fiction, because then it allows you to understand what you maybe before didn't have any idea, but as you kept doing the sports stuff, you could easily start seeing those symbolisms. And then once the sports, I guess the sports love, quote unquote, just faded away, and then the literature love just was so headstrong. Now, was it because of the like the words, the symbolism, the ability that you are capable of creating anything with words, or what primarily drew you in just to the literature?
I think the characters are interesting. Those characters that are complex, and
Hmm.
even kind of. I know we're going between two kind of different genres here, but John Updike, who was a great fiction writer, novelist, short story writer, he wrote about Ted Williams' last at bat,
Hmm.
and it was just a great. It was an expose. It was an article about describing kind of the character of Ted Williams. Things
Hmm.
that you don't, we watch like 30 for 30, those type, in-depth kind of analysis of athletes.
Hmm.
And being an athlete, you find out that a lot of those characters are very complex too, to say the
Hmm.
least, with social media and things we find out today. So, yeah, so I mean, I think the complexity of character is so interesting. It really draws in my own students, and
Mm.
it wanted me to create my own complex characters. Currently it's that morally ambiguous character. We always, I talk to my students about Henrik Ibsen and James Joyce and all the rest, and then I
Hmm.
said, well, what you watch on Netflix um, with a Breaking Bad or a Better Call Saul, or characters who you think they're doing something good, or they're going to be the hero of the story, but maybe they kind of step over the edge and go the wrong direction. And that's really
Right.
interesting, um, literature as in life. So it's people are complex, characters are complex, and complexity in what I read wanted me to create my own characters. And that's really what I worked on with the last collection, Delirium Fades. Um, Characters who are very, very complex and definitely morally ambiguous at times.
Now, what made you essentially compile a number of stories together? Was it just that you just wanted to give so much that it was impossible to just put it all under one story, and you just wanted to share as many different pieces that you had readily available?
Yeah. So I think I mentioned it before in my bio, but I did a lot of track and field along the way.
Hmm.
And I always liked to race like the mile where you knew where the finish line was.
Right.
And 5K, 10K, it got a little bit more complicated. But
Yes.
the point of this is like a short story to me. I really felt I knew where that ending was, and
Hmm.
I knew I could come up with, 15 pages, 20 pages worth of material. And I stayed interested. And a good short story is going to have those plot points in the conflict and the complex character. And you cover a lot of ground in 20 pages or
Hmm.
15 pages. And some of the best stories that I've read are quite short,
Right.
going back to like Edgar Allan Poe,
Hmm.
or, I do a lot with James Joyce. So short stories to me were very interesting because previously in graduate school, I had been working on screenplays.
Mhm.
And those were 90 pages, 120 pages. And I would I'd say to, hey, would you like to read my screenplay? People like, yeah, I'll get around to it. But when I got out of grad school and I took some of those ideas and put them into short stories, I'd say, hey,
Mhm.
you want to read a short story of mine? Sure. And the next day I get feedback.
Mm.
I found that I was getting more feedback on my short fiction than
Mhm.
some of the longer fiction and the screenplays that I put out. So that's kind of why I want, that's why I've done 3 collections of short stories, because they come fast. Ideas. I have an idea. I keep a notebook. I'll write down, okay, guy gets on a subway in London and finds a briefcase.
Mhm.
Nobody else is around. Go. And then, what's in that briefcase? Oh, secret documents. Oh, we spin into this whole, it turns into the Bourne Identity over the next 15, 20 pages. So I found it tough to really go the distance and do that kind of marathon novel, screenplay type writing. And I really just enjoyed the sprint of a short story because so much happens, like I said, in a short amount of time.
Right, and that's perfectly understandable with the attention span nowadays as well. You have almost a much more guaranteed that they even finish the first couple of pages, just because the attention span might not even reach there.
Right.
And your stories, like the one sentences describing each story, are amazing. Like the one that pulled me was an Asian con woman is confronted by her son for her criminal lifestyle. Like that is
Yeah,
so
yeah.
intriguing. There's so many questions just from that one sentence alone.
Yeah, I just, and again, you read a few things and you say, that's a great story. Maybe I could kind of play with it. And what I've found is that plagiarism, you start to copy an idea and then it goes a totally different direction.
Mm-hmm.
So I think like we run into stories that, you read a lot about con people. So I put this woman in an apartment and out in the valley in California, the
Mm-hmm.
San Fernando Valley, and she's pulling all these different schemes and then suddenly she gets caught, and of course she got caught once before somebody caught, but she took care of that person. But then her
Mm-hmm.
son catches her and he's involved with the law. And, what is he going to do? Is he going to turn his mother in? Yeah. So that was kind of a fun story to write, and that came from, again, I don't have a lot of time. So maybe, on a break, at school, or so I don't know where I wrote it down, but I just said, ladies in an apartment, she was calling people on the telephone and trying to get donations and trying to do these different scams. And, and then it developed into a pretty good story. A lot of people actually responded to that too. So.
And now, how do you end up determining which of your short stories that you created are going to fit into your collection material?
Well, I mean, this one, the title of it is Delirium Fades. And that was sort of like, I wanted to have that thread where James Joyce wrote a story called The Boarding House. And
Mm-hmm.
he wrote about this woman had a husband, and Mrs. Mooney had a husband who was a drunk, and he almost killed her with one night with a cleaver. And, she was the daughter of a butcher. And so she ends up divorcing him. And in early 20th century Ireland, in Dublin, she has to open a boarding house for men.
Mm-hmm.
And so one of her tenants falls in love with, or lust with her younger daughter, who's like 18 years old. And this is a little bit inappropriate. So she basically puts him in a jam because of Catholicism and religion. So he has to
Mm-hmm.
marry the daughter, who's not too bright, doesn't have a big future, but she
Mm-hmm.
corners this guy. But there's a moment in the story where the male character, they go into his head, and he said, we met, we kissed, I carried the candle up at nighttime to her bedroom, this whole thing. And, but delirium fades.
Mm-hmm.
And then he's going to, the point in the story is where he has to go meet with the mother, and she's going to say, I could mention this to your employer about your inappropriate relationship with my daughter, or you could do the right thing. You don't know if she got pregnant or if there was just an inappropriate relationship. But, that whole idea of love
Mm-hmm.
or delirium in, people take substances,
Mm-hmm.
alcohol, drugs. People get caught up with these romantic ideas in their heads. They're caught up in a delirious state,
Mm-hmm.
and it eventually fades. It eventually reality is going to hit them. It's that story like, well, this isn't going to end well for this character. And I kind of like that idea, because in life, you get in these mindsets sometimes where you think you're just floating and
Right.
something happens and you come back down to earth. And so I kind of like that idea. And that's the thread throughout the piece. Each of these characters kind of hits a wall. We start at 5 minutes to midnight. That's where the
Mm-hmm.
story starts. And then basically the delirium fades around when the clock strikes 12. There's going to be some conflict or someone catches them or they run into some jam. And so, yeah, so that's kind of the thread behind it that I had that idea and I stuck with it the whole time. So one of my friends said, you realize that you've used the word delirium in the book like 37 times. So that's a repetition. So
Now, in your case, what would make you decide that a short story either made the cut
mhm.
or you had to cut some out? Like, are there some stories that you had to cut out and you couldn't
Oh,
include into?
oh yeah. No, this is I have a folder with my B and C stories on my computer.
Oh,
These
nice.
are the A stories that made it. And then, it's like an album, a band goes to
Mm-hmm,
the
mm-hmm.
studio and they record, you know, 37 songs. Well, we can only put 12 on the album.
Right.
So, I kind of treat it that way. I've played a little music in my day and I've had to make those decisions, musically when we
Mm-hmm.
recorded. And it was like, okay, well, that one's going to be out. Maybe we'll save it for next time, or it just doesn't make the cut, or it doesn't fit the overall work.
Right.
So there's a lot of thought that went into it, and it really these stories made it because they all kind of fit that thread of the delirium and it fading at times. So
Did you use some of the feedback in order to make that determination?
oh yeah, I have so many because I'm an English teacher. I just have so many critics, editors, and the first edition came out, and one of my colleagues came in, and she said, "I caught a couple of typos," and she had like.
Uh-oh.
So we actually, my editor was really cool. We went back and we did some editing on it. We put out a second edition because, yeah, I mean, it's you have 90,000 words in there.
Mm-hmm.
There's going to be a couple of hiccups, and so
Right.
we
Right.
made sure we corrected them. But yeah, no, I have a lot of people who say, you know what, that story's not working, and I have a lot of friends who are on the East Coast. I have a friend, Anthony Cipriano, who's on the West Coast, he sold a couple of movies. He grew up in my hometown. He was Anthony created the Bates Motel,
Mm-hmm.
which was the prequel of the Psycho series. It was on, I think, was it on AMC? I forget what channel it was on, but it was Norman Bates before he became the Psycho killer. And so he came up with that idea and he sold that, and he's sold a couple of movies. So I send him a lot of my stuff, and he actually, if you look at the back of my book, I'm not sure if it's on Amazon, but he gave me some blurbs and things like that. So he's doing it at a professional level. I'm
Mm-hmm.
still here in Massachusetts. I've coming back from the West Coast, and doing it on my own back here. So, but I do miss the sunshine in California. So.
Now, one of the things is, as a short fiction writer myself,
Yeah.
how do you determine when the story is finished? Do you determine it based off of word count, or do you base it off of like a sort of a feeling?
What I've been trying to do, and what I did with this collection in general now, I try to write down my ending first, what's going to
Ooh.
happen at the end, and kind of go from the back to the front.
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes I'll come up with a scene from the beginning, but I'm gonna I really want to know how this is going to end.
Mm-hmm.
So I usually have written down the ending somewhere,
Okay.
and if I know where the end is, I was trying to explain it to one of my friends because I'm around a lot of runners, and I just was up at the marathon the other day, and I did a lot of coaching too. And I'm like, so this is what you want to run at the state meet. This is your time. So we got to back it all the way to the first. What's the first workout? You know? So I kind of treat the short story collections like that. Like I know where I want to go.
Right.
And I know what that ending is. And then I kind of go back and write there. And so, because I really feel like you need to know where your destination is. Otherwise, some of the things that occur earlier in the short story are not going to make sense, you know. And I love it when the reader has to piece it all together and they finally get there and maybe they're surprised. I like a lot of like James Joyce was big on, you know, those open-ended endings type of deal. Like you figure out, you come to a conclusion. You know?
Yeah.
So, you know, he would write about characters in Dublin, and you get to the end of the story, and you know, they'd have it ending, and it's like the kid figures out something in the story, and the reader has to kind of really put it together. You know, it's unique. I mean, a lot of people are frustrated. They're like, no, I want to know exactly what happened, or it seems vague, or, you know, but I do like those stories where it's a little bit unclear. And the reader has to come to their own conclusions about things.
So your favorite way of structuring a story is to essentially reverse engineer it. Because once you already know what the ending is, then now you need to figure out how it starts.
Yeah, I don't know if Stephen King, I listened to his book on writing. I don't know if he put that in my head. I'm a big Dennis Lehane fan. You know, he's written some great stuff. He wrote a great short story that's called Until Gwen. And, you know, some of my stuff has that feel. He's really gritty. He wrote for The Wire, you know, but he's into a lot of like, you know, I don't think he didn't really grow up. He grew up in an Irish family in Boston and Dorchester, but he likes to write about those criminal types, you know, and kind of a detective type fashion, Shutter Island, Mystic River, those types of films. But he's one heck of a short story writer. You know, so he's put out at least one collection, Coronado short stories. So I really enjoy his style.
And now, how do you make the determination? Like, as you mentioned in your short story collection, there's like 90,000 words. So how do you determine which of those words you're choosing? So per short story, I'm sure that you could have written 20, 30, 40,000 words per sentence that I saw based off of all your stories. So how do you determine which of the stories or which of the words you're going to use within there without going over what you feel makes that short story as concise as possible?
Well, you know, I hate to sound like a broken record going back to James Joyce, but that Dubliners collection has some really short ones. And then you get to the final one, The Dead, which is it's a novella. Okay. So his last story was a long one. So I think if I know it can go the distance, that's when I kind of extend it. If I think it's going to be best kind of be, you know, and I think that's good for the reader too, because readers like quick stories. And then the good one, maybe you extend it a little bit longer and stretch it out. If it's got the feel of a novella, or if it's a long story, it really depends. You know, it has to do with the plot and you know, how many twists and turns you want to take. But I think some of my best stories have been short, really short, like 10 pages, 12 pages, and you know, I mean, less is more. You know, sometimes the reader really gets a lot out of a short story. Sometimes, you know, I had my students read The Dead, and they're like, I got kind of bored, Mr. I really like the shorter ones that were a little bit more packed with, you know, they put everything in there in 12 pages. So, yeah.
Now, who helps you condense the stories? Do you step back after writing it and then like after a week or two go back and condense it up? Or do you have like beta readers or assistants or your editors that help you shorten up the stories if need be?
I worked with, so I have a friend, Julie, who does a lot of reading for me. And then I have an editor in Maryland, Elaine York, who she did the formatting and the editing and proofreading of the book. So, that cost a little bit of money out of my pocket to do the editing, but it was well worth it. It was my most professional put together. The previous ones were edited by, the owner of a small press, which she was doing all the work, and she did a great job. Her name's Cynthia Reeser. And then hiring someone to do it professionally took a lot of pressure off me to do all that proofreading. I think I like to create the content and then have someone clean it up.
Now, as a teacher
Yeah.
that specializes in AP Lit, you would still have somebody else do it for you?
Well, I think because I'm busy too. I mean, like, you get your day job and then you do this on the side. So, and I think when you write your own stuff, you get a little bit too close to it sometimes. And, as a writer, it's like, I'm just too close to this. I need someone else to take a look at it. So, and sometimes you miss stuff. I mean, I missed a lot. I needed to really clean up the copy, because sometimes you're writing so fast because your time's limited that you may make those errors. The one thing with AP Literature and Lang is that the kids are writing those essays in 45 minutes. I'm not sure. I didn't take AP in high school. We didn't have it at that point. But I took honors. I took what they offered. But I mean, those kids have to write 45-minute essays.
Yeah.
So some of the best samples I show them, they're like, why are all those crossouts on there? Because it's a draft, and so I'm teaching really the process of drafting. But yeah, no, I do like to have another set of eyes look at things. I think it's pretty helpful.
And just to make that comparison more true, so essentially those kids, they're pretty much on crunch time with 45 minutes. So they gotta go in there, and your job is to be the AP coach and, hey, listen, you got 45 minutes to give A+ drafting. Like, you can't be, Michael Jordan or Michael Johnson in there, but do your absolute best, because you only have 45 minutes. But essentially you're creating what they would have the capacity to do so, except you just have much, much, much more time and many more resources available, correct?
Yeah. I mean, I'm a Microsoft Word guy. I tried a few different programs, to try to clean up the copy. But really, to have a good proofreader go over it, I think you can't beat that. And teach your kids to edit, but at the same time, really, you want to teach them a control of language so they write it correctly the first time. So to work on their syntax. And so I do a lot of strategies with that, as far as there's a program called Quill, which allows you to kind of kids go online and do drills, and it's grammar, syntax, trying to find the right words to try to work on that copy too. And I try to give them a lot of feedback too, conferencing and just looking at their writing in general. So, but we use rubrics. I'm sure that you're young enough to. But the rubric system is pretty good too. It gives them a pretty good idea of where they're at. So I was pretty happy. We did a mock exam, and my AP Literature students in January did very well. Their number one essay was the poetry one. Question one's on poetry. So they had to read a poem, break it down, and write an analysis. And we did, it's a 6-point rubric, and a lot of kids were getting 4s, 5s, and 6s on that one. They also have, which is something interesting in AP Literature too. I teach, there's a short prose fiction section, question 2. And so that'll be an excerpt from a short story or a novel, and the kids have to analyze what's going on with it. So we do a lot of short work too. So I'm coming off my short stories and bringing that in the classroom, kind of like it all works together, really. So
now, how do you create your characters? Since you mentioned that you start at the end, do you already know what your characters are going to go through? Do you have an inspiration for the characters, or once you have the ending in mind, then you start to develop who's partaking in there and where they're coming from?
Yeah, I usually like to start with ordinary people who maybe get into a situation which creates a lot of havoc in their lives. So as you can see from the back, I talk about the housewife who she was an IRA operative who came to America. It's like, well, she was just a housewife a minute ago, and then suddenly someone found out who she used to be. Had the bank president who changed his identity during the war, and then someone shows up and knows all about it and wants to destroy the life that he currently has. The one about the man who picked up the suitcase in the subway in London. So I was in London one time. I was on the subway and I had done a 10K race. I went out and ran a race, and I got on the subway, and this guy gets on, and he's Egyptian, and he's a very fit runner. And I strike up a conversation with him. And he said, "Oh yeah, I came in third in that race with 10,000 people, which I did not come in third." And so we're riding the subway back together, and so I really had a good conversation with him. And so he had come to London, and he was a waiter, and he was telling me he was like the #1 marathoner in Egypt, but he had this whole story. And so I left him and got off the train. And that was like, that was back in 2011, 2012. And so I started thinking about that. I was like, what if he got on that train one night after a shift and there was a briefcase there? And what if he picked up the briefcase and there was some sort of confidential document, or, someone planted it there, someone was trying to send a message, and so I went from there. And then, I said, okay, this is what is going to happen at the end. I won't reveal the ending, but, I went back to like situations like that. You run into people, you meet people, you see things. And then, I just have kind of a wild imagination, and it's what happens when you grow up in New England. It's not that exciting around here. So you got to create all these stories in your head, right?
It's so true. I was gonna ask you where did you get these inspirations, but this one sounded like it's based off of a semi-true-ish story.
Yeah, I mean, and the other book that so this was my first one, called History of Santa Monica. So it's got a kind of a madman 1960s silhouette going there. And so these stories were primarily set in Santa Monica, Los Angeles. And I lived out there. Like I told you, I went to graduate school, and you would meet people. My friend owned an Irish pub. Guy who went to high school with me. I moved out there. He said, "Hey, I bought a pub." So I would hang out there, and I would meet people, and they were trying to make it in the entertainment industry, and suddenly they showed up in a short story. I mean, that's the way it works. That's lawsuits are all pending from the people who. It's one of those things where I'm just always observing people. I mean, like going to LA was a big. Sorry, my chair is squeaking. That's what the noise is. It's a great people watching place, and I was over at USC studying. So I saw a lot of, the very rich and affluent side. And then I'd go back to Santa Monica, and Santa Monica was, this was 2002, 2003. So it wasn't the Santa Monica of today.
Right.
I lived next to a bar, and across the street from a Mexican restaurant. People were smoking on my doorstep. Homeless people were all around. It was kind of a rough, environment. And then my son William was born out there, and we got to get the hell out of here. We got to go back to Massachusetts. So we were living in like a rent control apartment. And my wife was teaching. I was going to grad school, and then I was teaching, and my son was born. And so a lot of the stories in History of Santa Monica were based on that. At the same time, I'm writing screenplays. I'm like, maybe something's going to hit. My buddy was doing my buddy Jason was doing the comedy circuit. So I was going out to watch shows and going into Hollywood and going down to the Sunset Strip and, just seeing that lifestyle down there. And then you come back and you start thinking about these different tales that you can write about. So, Yeah, LA was definitely good for stimulating creativity. There was a lot going on out there. So, and we're going back in late June to visit family. I have family out there. So we'll, I'll probably head up to LA for a couple of days and see some friends. So it's an interesting place.
Now, do you use that as a potential opportunity to continue some of those stories?
Yeah.
Or once you finish, it's over?
No. I definitely, I did two versions of the Santa Monica.
Mm-hmm.
I did a second version, which were some of the B stories. And, I
Might
go
you
out
work
there.
on the B stories to upgrade them to A stories for the sequels?
Oh, yeah. No, they were B stories at this time when we went to publication. And, I had published a lot of these stories
Mm-hmm.
in journals. I was getting them published in online journals or print journals. So I think I had 4 published before the actual collection came out. And that was how I kind of got the deal with the small press. It was Aqueous Press, which is
Mm-hmm.
a small press down in Florida. And I said, "Hey, I'm already published. Would you like to do the full collection?" And Cynthia Reeser, who was the publisher, said, "Yeah, no, let's do it." So it worked out great. Yeah. So developing those stories, you constantly trying to rework them. And, if it's a B story, you might go back and say, "Hey, maybe I better revisit that and
Mm.
try to bring it up to A quality." So that's how I work. I mean, it's just constantly reworking ideas, and stuff that I've thrown away, I picked up again and turned it into something. So it just maybe it wasn't right at the time, So and then you go back to it and say, I feel like I've heard that story with musicians.
Mm-hmm.
They throw away a song,
Right.
or they give it to someone else and it becomes a big hit. How many times
Mm.
I don't want to record that one, but I'm going to give it to another artist, and then they make it a huge hit, and that happens quite often. So maybe the timing wasn't right, and maybe I needed to look at it differently.
Mm-hmm.
And then, or someone said, "Hey, I just read this. You didn't put that in the book. Why didn't you do something with that?" So
That's interesting that your B level might be, a different version of yourself's A level,
right,
which is actually pretty interesting because you might have been, your judgment might have been clouded through the years, through the experiences. And now that you're going to revisit and physically visit as well and enjoy yourself, you might look back at those stories and actually see the diamond and the rust that you left years ago.
yeah.
That's
So I mean, there was one story that I had worked on so I had to write a thesis for
mm-hmm.
my to graduate from USC. I got a master's of arts, and so had a lot of great teachers. This guy Andy Meyer was a producer for The Breakfast Club.
Mm.
You know that movie, The Breakfast Club, and so I had this idea of I wrote a screenplay about a psychologist
Mm-hmm.
who gets in some trouble, and at the same time, when he's going through some legal trouble, he starts to see this vision of John Lennon.
Mm-hmm.
And he's kind of discredited as a psychologist. He's a child psychologist, and all these accusations come up. And he was into the Beatles as a kid, and he believes this apparition of John Lennon's real.
Mm-hmm.
And then something happens, and he stumbles into a new patient who is this teenage musical prodigy and is kind of like a young John Lennon. So that was the premise of my screenplay. And, I wrote it and no one read it. It worked as a thesis statement. I mean, my advisor read it,
Mm-hmm.
and I was able to graduate. But then that became a short story in the first collection called Tracks. And, people kind of like that. It was like,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. Did you ever see the movie Field of Dreams, where Kevin Costner is out in Iowa and he builds a baseball field, and suddenly all these Joe Jackson and all these famous dead ball players arrive at the field. It's sort of like the ghost arriving, like a Hamlet type of thing.
Yeah.
And so those stories, those were interesting to me. And like I said, it was a screenplay first, and then it became
Mm-hmm.
a story because people would read the short story. They had time for that. So
And now, if you had a chance to revisit yourself, let's say you had like, one of those crazy superpowers and they said you only had one time to visit yourself at 18 years old, you have 30 seconds to give yourself some piece of advice. What would you tell a younger version of yourself?
I would have probably gone out to Los Angeles a lot earlier. I think my friends, like I keep mentioning Anthony Cipriano, you can look him up
Hmm.
on IMDb. He went out in the 20s and he started work. I think he worked for Rosie O'Donnell's as like a writer assistant, but he got into Hollywood very early.
Hmm.
And then in his 30s, he started selling screenplays. And I feel like I didn't, I wish I had headed that direction when I was like 18, 19, or, maybe after college
Hmm.
um, to take a shot out there, because I think, I'm 50 now. I'm like,
Hmm.
I'm really trying to put the pedal to the metal here. I don't, I think my 50s this is my last shot, but, no. But it's one of those things where I think the younger you start, and you look at the Matt Damons and Ben Afflecks, they kind of gave it up, and I was just listening to a podcast about how like Matt Damon and Ben Affleck, they were sleeping on couches and writing Good
Hmm.
Will Hunting, and they wrote that screenplay. It's
Right.
incredible, and they treated it. People wanted to buy it and do it with different actors, and they wanted to act in it. So I think when you're 20, 22, 24, to really go out there and really take a shot at it, that would be the advice that I give myself. So
And now, currently, since you've been going through a lot as a writer,
yeah.
who, in your experience, in your years, are your favorite top three authors? Not
Okay.
including yourself, of course.
Yeah. I'm a big fan of Dennis Lehane, who I mentioned earlier.
Hmm.
Um, I always go back to Henrik Ibsen, who wrote a play called The Doll's House. A Doll's House, I've used that in the classroom, and I'm still getting the same reaction out of kids in 2022 as I did, when I first started using it. It's just got such a great plot to it, and the
Hmm.
conflict and the complex characters. I just love Ibsen. And then my third would probably be James Joyce. So I'm a little bit on the older side with writers. In the same breath, so that's three. Robert Parker would be someone I'd kind of put with Lehane, because he wrote about Boston and detect. He did
Hmm.
the Spencer series,
Hmm.
um, which I know Mark Wahlberg made a film, but the actual novels they're great. I mean, he was a Dashiell Hammett fan. He was into detective fiction, and I thought he was fantastic. So
Now, as a person who loves the way that words are on paper and electronically, what is a tip of advice that you see recurringly a mistake in your students that you would just like to enlighten all of us? Because I know there's got to be at least something that you're like, man, 9 out of 10 kids are always doing this one mistake, and I wish they would just not.
I think sentence variety. The long sentences are for description,
Mm.
and short sentences are for action. And the more that you vary that up with your writing, I think it becomes more fluid. My students struggle with compound sentences,
Hmm.
um, prepositional phrases. I mean, just phrasing things and furthermore. And it's important to note, like they just phrases and transitions and things like that. I think that's something I try to put in my writing. But I mean, when I show the samples, the models, they
Hmm.
really it really pops out that these kids who are getting the high scores on the AP exams know they have a command of language, a
Hmm.
sophistication of language.
Mm.
That's actually 1 point. You get 1 point for a thesis statement,
Right.
4 points for evidence and reasoning,
Hmm.
and 1 point for sophistication. So there's a 6 point rubric, and I'm talking academically now, but I really, in my own writing, I'd like to have that flow, and definitely have that sophistication and command of language too.
And now, I can't help it, but what you said earlier about how the fact that you made a phone call or you communicated with somebody that already saw all of your previous work and you asked them in order to publish your collection. And is that how you created that first collection of your work?
The first one, yeah. So the first one was with History Santa Monica. This is the original cover. I think I changed it on Amazon so it would be a little bit different, but I really like this cover. My friend designed it, Lisa Graves. But yeah, no, I just queried people. You know, I was and I probably put out 100 queries, and then one person. You know, it's only takes one.
It's true. Only takes one.
In love and publishing. No, excuse. No, it's I just caught this publisher at the right time, and she was interested, and you know, I'm indebted because it happened fast too. It was like, contacted her in January, and then the book was out in May. So, but I had written it all. I had edited. I was in a really good position to publish, so I saved her a lot of work. But yeah, so it's pretty cool how it works.
Wait, so when you already were in contacts with her, the book was already done?
Yeah, I had written it, and I was just trying to sell it, you know.
Ah.
And I think that's important too. When you're a writer, you want to make sure that you have a finished work where you know, like, with someone like Anthony Cipriano, I sent him a couple of screenplays lately. I wrote a couple of screenplays, and I want, you know, before I was sending him stuff half finished, but you know, now I have a little bit more grasp on things. I want him to see the whole work. You know what I mean?
Right.
Not just something that's not polished or half done. So he's been a great mentor. You know, he's actually younger than me, but he's mentored me.
You know, that's actually pretty cool because that's allowing you as the literal subject matter expert in regards to English and literature and professional writing to still see and understand that there's others that either they just have a talent or an affinity for something. And plus, if they give you their point of view, it might unlock a crazy amount of understanding in your brain because you're seeing it in a completely different way.
Yeah. And that, I mean, out in LA, I taught at a school where there were a lot of people in the business, and George Wendt, he played Norm on Cheers. You know who that is? He's kind of the big guy. When he walked in the bar, they said, Norm. Cheers was a big Boston series in the 80s. And I taught his son. And so he was one of the first people who mentored me, read my work. I went over his house. I wrote a lot of college recommendations for his son, Joe, who is a great kid. And, you know, we both had an affinity for music, and his son played. But anyways, he actually called me. I gave him my screenplay thinking, yeah, he's not going to do anything with it. And he read it on the plane when he flew to Chicago and called me. He's like, hey, Mike, I'm in Chicago. I'm walking down the street. I just finished your screenplay on the plane, and I think it's great. And he had all these notes. They get a lot of notes from people. Hollywood's, you know. And so he gave me notes. And then another parent was George Zaloom, who did a movie called Encino Man, which was actually kind of a comedy hit in the 80s, or actually I think that might be in the 90s. But
yes,
you know, Encino Man, yeah. So he was another parent, and I said, hey, would you like to read a screenplay? Sure. And he called me up. He had all these notes for me. He had me on the phone. He's like, get a pen. And so I just, you know, and then he's like, I'm going to send you a copy. So these people did this. There was no charge. You know, they were just, you know, I was at the time in my 30s, and they were just trying to like help, you know, and it's kind of cool to get mentors or people who are like, I think teaching people and helping people. And I try to do that myself, not only with my job, but, you know, there may not be a paycheck at the end of it, but it's something that you should do as a person. And I think it makes you feel better, and you're helping someone too. So, and they did that for me. So And I guess the moral of the story here is, although the screenplays didn't, succeed,
Hmm.
the fiction came later, and
Hmm.
that's where I found my success. And they've all been supportive, giving me blurbs, um, you know. And the other teacher I'd like to mention, Susan Campo. She was a USC professor, but she was a published short story writer. One of my first professors at USC was very helpful as far as getting me into that short fiction, short story genre. So I had some really good examples, really good mentors out there.
Yeah, I was just about to ask you how vital, is having a mentor, somebody that either came before you or is currently better than you at what you're trying to accomplish.
Absolutely. Hang out, if you want to be skinny, do what skinny people do. If you want to be a good writer, if you want to be a good writer, do what the great writers are doing, or the people who knew Hollywood. These guys, one was an actor, one was a producer, one was a writer. They all knew, but they all know each other out there, and they're all,
Hmm.
and you might be an actor, but you might be writing stuff. You might say, well, acting's not going to last forever, so I better get writing or producing. You see these people who, like a Ben Affleck,
Hmm.
or he produces all his movies, he directs them, he acts in them. So I mean, I think Hollywood is survival, and a lot of these people do that. So I've never been in it, but I was around it, I observed it, and I like to write about it. So it's really interesting.
Oh, that's actually such an amazing way to just tie it all together. Be capable, be literally prepared, be able to shift from doing one thing into another.
Yeah,
Because Ben Affleck, he's capable of doing it all as well as just doing one part of it. So it's actually pretty cool, from being a screenwriter to being a sports journalist to being a short. I don't even know what's the proper term, because it's not
short
just a
story
short
writer. Yeah,
story, but it's a collection. So a memoir author, because you write a collection of short stories and publish them all together.
yeah,
Now,
yeah.
I do have a question. Would you ever individually publish them, or are you just like the collection way, and the delirium phase is just much better to keep it all together?
Yeah, I think at this point, I wouldn't go back and, if someone had an interest, to put it in a magazine or something like that. But a lot of journals have, um, well, if you published it outside of the journal, we don't want it. You know, you want to be
Right.
the first one. And some journals I found, like, they would contact you and say, we want to publish your story. Then you wouldn't hear anything for 6 months.
Oh Lord.
So you go, well, what am I going to do?
Right.
And then, I think at one time I published it with another journal, and then the first one came back, and I said, I've already published it. Hey, we wanted that one. It's like,
First
we
come,
left
first
you
serve.
hanging for 6 months. It's
Right,
like,
right, right, right.
yeah. So, and I guess I'm enough of an amateur writer that, no, there was no repercussions. There was no consequences, but they're they want original content. They don't want it to be, in 6 different publications because you went around and sold your story. And sometimes you get paid on these too. You get paid little, $30 here, $40 here
Hmm.
for publishing a story, but that's not why I'm doing it. I have a day job, and if something strikes a chord with somebody, and they, like I said, I wrote 2 screenplays, and I took a couple of the stories from the collection and
Hmm.
extended them into screenplays, and they came out okay. They came out okay. There was a father and son. The one, I think I described it on the back as, let's see. I like my descriptions here. I did a good job, but I just forgot what I wrote. The father and son team who, basically they become diamond thieves. So that was something that I turned into a screenplay,
Mm.
and it's called Diamond Bar. And they go out in the Atlantic to find a ship that sank at sea with all these diamonds on it. And the father found out about it in prison,
Hmm.
and of course, the FBI comes looking for him, and of course, there's a drug cartel guy in there who comes looking for the diamonds. Everyone's looking for the diamonds. So, yeah. So it was a fun story to write. And I like I said, I sent it out to Mr. Cipriano, and he gave me some notes. And, it's really kind of just working on the first 20 pages. His advice was kind of, want you to go back to the first 20 pages, try to, set up the story in a way. I was using a voiceover too. I was using that character who, the father's walking out of Walpole prison, and he's sitting in the car, and you hear the voice. My father always had an affinity for diamonds. He starts narrating the story, and Anthony was saying, yeah, I don't know if that's going to work for that. Maybe you take out the voiceover and you just let the characters establish themselves with their behavior and dialogue, because character really is behavior, and a screenplay is a series of images on the screen, right?
Right.
You tell a story through a series of images. And I think that the problem, a lot of screenwriters, they want to write a play.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, I got some cute dialogue I want to get in there, but they don't really focus on what is the viewer seeing on the screen, and how can you tell the story through a series of images. And I think if you think back to some of your favorite films, there was a lot of imagery on the screen to start off, and you were watching characters behave.
Mm-hmm.
And you were seeing the complexity behind the characters before they even spoke sometimes.
Right.
And I think that's a really good film. Because you want to, we all want to, like I talked about going to LA and observing people. That's so interesting. And when you sit down to watch a film in a theater or in front of your TV, you want to observe.
Right.
And I think dialogue is really important, but I think, even writing short stories, describing, description of scenes and things like that can really set up a story nicely. So.
Now, for those that are actually interested in your books, hard book, ebook, as well as your screenplay, do you have them all in separate locations, or where can people reach out to get your material?
So this time around, first of all, this book right here is available at one bookstore. And it's at Jeff Kinney's bookstore in Plainville, Massachusetts. Mm-hmm. It's called An Unlikely Story. Jeff Kinney is the guy who did the Diary of the Wimpy Kid.
Oh, that's actually pretty cool.
Yeah. So he built a bookstore. So it used to be a country store. And when he moved to Plainville, he sold a lot of movies. He's done very well in life. And so he loved this old country. I think he brought his kids to this country store, and it was falling apart. And so eventually the town said, we're gonna tear it down. So he decided to buy it, and he was going to restore it, but it was so structurally compromised that he ended up tearing it down, and he built this like colonial looking brick bookstore, which is one of the greatest structures that I've seen in any small town. It looks like it belongs in like old Boston or Williamsburg, and it's an amazing bookstore. And so he used to accept local authors, but now he accepts all. He doesn't. There was a section like locally published people, but now I'm in the mystery suspense section. So he puts you in the mainstream. So you have to basically bring the book in, sign a contract, the whole deal. And so it's currently being sold there. The other books are sold on Amazon. And you can look me up on Michael J. Atwood. I have an author page. And that's pretty much where I'm selling them now.
And do you have access to your screenplays, or somebody that was interested in one of the potential, many different ideas that you gave? How would somebody get a hold of you?
So, I mean, I could put it in the chat, but, just my general email, and I'd be glad to share. I don't know if you're interested in it too, but I'd love to share. So, I mean, I could put my email in the chat if that's good with you.
No, okay, perfect. So that we'll definitely include that in the description for the podcast episode. So once the podcast does go live on Apple, Spotify, everywhere else, we'll include that as well. and we can also have that updated on YouTube and Facebook Live afterwards with that. So that way, just in case, you never know, you have a lot of great ideas that you mentioned earlier. So somebody wants to reach out to you in order to get you and then to collaborate on some sort of a script, screenplay, or at least give you some feedback or ask you for some feedback, as you've done, been doing this for many, many years. I would, wouldn't be too surprised if that does occur. So we'll add that to the description. Other than that, thank you so much, Michael, for
Thank you.
giving us so many nuggets of information, as well as giving us a lot of the behind the scenes or the backgrounds of your stories, how you created them, as well as pretty much your style of teaching. So kudos for you. Again, check out Fades on, or excuse me, Delirium Fades on Amazon, as well as we're going to include his email if you want to discuss
Yeah.
anything regarding his script writing or screenplay. Other than that, this has been another amazing episode of the Pen Podcast. I've been your co-host, Nico Pingan. Michael, thank you so much. Take care and have a great rest of your night then.
Hey, thanks a lot, Nico. It's been great talking with you, man.
All right.